Hi, I'm Leanpub from Leanpub, and in this episode of the Front Matter podcast, I'll be interviewing Jeroen Leenarts, based in
Hiya.
Apeldoorn. Hi, based in, and I'll get this pronunciation wrong too, based in Apeldoorn in the Netherlands. Jeroen is a developer relations engineer currently specializing in iOS at Stream, the API for scalable feeds and chat with more than 1 billion end users. You can follow him on Twitter at appforce1, that's the number one, and check out his website at appforce1.net. And he hosts the AppForce1 podcast. You can also find him on Mastodon at hachyderm.io at appforce1. Jeroen is the author of the Leanpub book, Being a Lead Software Developer. In the book, he helps you learn how to be a great lead software developer, sharing the best practices, tips, and tools he has himself learned on his own for achieving maximum impact and result. In this interview, we're going to talk about his background and career, professional interests, his book, and at the end, we'll talk a little bit about his experience as an author. So thank you very much for being on the Leanpub Front Matter podcast.
Hi, how are you doing, Len?
I'm doing okay. I was saying before we started recording that I'm traveling currently, so my environment isn't entirely in my control, and I don't have my cool green screen and stuff. But thank you very much for tolerating the unusual environment. To you and to anyone watching.
Yeah, you get to have a view in my messy office in the attic. So that's I think we're on fair ground here.
Good thing. So the first question I always like to ask people is a little bit about their origin story. So I was wondering if you could talk a little bit about where you grew up and how you found your way into a career as a developer and then a lead developer and specializing in iOS eventually.
Oh wow, that's the whole story in one go. So where should I start? Yeah, so my father, he was into electronics. So he worked at Philips, which is a big electronics branch at some point in his career. At some point, he also was running a grocery store. So I basically grew up with my father at home and my mom working away from home. And my father always had like an interest in tinkering with electronics, at some point also computers. So we were quite early with all these technical things in our youth. So we started with a ZX Spectrum, at least that's the first computer that I remember. And that's a Sinclair ZX Spectrum. So that's like this tiny thing with these rubbery keys in there. And I think it was Manic Miner that I played like to an insane amount with my brother. And we mapped out all the levels of Manic Miner on paper at some point so that we could actually beat the game. But that was like my first exposure into computers. So there was like, even with programs, my father was recording them in the middle of the night over broadcast radio. So that you had like a tape that you would record and you could then play that back in your computer and you would have a program, which was mostly working. But you can imagine having a computer, want to load a program, it just takes like 15 to 30 minutes. And if one thing goes wrong, you have to start over again. So that's my first exposure. So I started playing video games as a young kid. We had like a 286 computer at home at some point, and I was fiddling with boot disks a lot to just get maximum performance out of a game like Wolfenstein 3D. So that's like the original back in the day version that was like quite close to when Commander Keen was a thing. That's also a very old video game. For us young people out there, please don't look it up because you will laugh about, okay, this is what the adults actually had fun with back in the day. So yeah, I did a lot of playing around with computers and video games on DOS when I was like a kid. So in my preteens and when I was a young teenager, and then at some point I did secondary school, finished that, and then it was time to basically choose like a vocational school. So what do you want to do when you grow up? I don't know what the exact comparison is in other countries, but in the Netherlands, you have like university and you have like a level of education that is like a little bit below that, but it's still very theoretical and you can get a good job with that. So it's professional university in some countries I would compare it with. So I basically got to choose what I wanted to do, and I did the simple thing. I think I like tinkering with computers, so I don't know, let's do something with computers that is near where I live, because I lived in a very small village in the east of the Netherlands. Comparatively east of the Netherlands, it's like there's probably states in the United States that are much bigger than the whole of the Netherlands, but that's just a different matter. 200 kilometers and you're already at the other side of the country. And 200 kilometers, that's like, I don't know, 150 miles or so, give or take. And so I basically got started with an education into something related to computer science. And it was a degree that was like focused on the technical application of software development. So there was some PLCs involved, program logic controllers, and we did a lot of low-level programming. So we at some point even had like a course in assembly, which was a lot of fun because it never worked. And then C programming. And the interesting thing was that after the second year, there was no program left for the whole education, because it was a new education, and I think somebody didn't expect a few of the students to actually make it into the third year, because it was a 4-year program. And we basically, the 6 of us, we didn't accept that. So we went to the exam review board and basically made our case, which resulted us in having like a dedicated teacher for the remainder of the program. So we had one single teacher, 6 students, and it was like, yeah, just go have fun, make sure that it's useful, and that we can give you an honest diploma at the end of this whole thing. So we did that, had a lot of fun, and that was then 2002 when I graduated. I did my internship at a smaller consulting company focused at the Dutch market, and they did Java development, and also did an internship with Java development. Worked at that company for 9 years, doing all kinds of client work, so on-site with clients. And the fun thing there was like I really got in like a junior, but they had a very good program to train people up to like an acceptable level. Because I always like to think if you get to deal with a consultant, they always seem like they know it all, but it's like they're just usually just running ahead of the pack just by a little bit, and that's just what they're trained to do. So it's like they seem to know everything, but they just probably read about it like last week, and then that's why they can charge you a healthy fee compared to like somebody that's on your contract, on your payroll with your own business, really. So I worked there for 9 years, and that was right around the time when iOS 3 became a thing, and that was like the first, it's iPhone OS actually, and that's like the first iPhone operating system that allowed you to do some sort of programming beyond just simple things that are browser-based with JavaScript. And I basically started looking into that. I was a typical iPod kid because I had like an iPod, and I was a real I really fell for the halo effect of the iPod, because I got an iPod, then at some point I got a Mac, and then I was like, hey, these Macs are fun. Okay, this internet communicator, it's a phone, it's whatever that you did, typical intro by Steve Jobs, and then that was like the moment, okay, I gotta have that. Unfortunately, the first iPhone, they didn't sell that in the Netherlands, not even in the whole of Europe, I think. So you had to like either import it or get it through some other means, which I didn't do because, I was busy with other things. But I did get a Mac, and a Mac G4. G4 something. So I basically started playing around with that, and it got to the point that I said to my employer, hey, I want to do something with this professionally. And we tried a few smaller proofs of concept, but there wasn't a customer buying into it back then, even though in our surroundings we were hearing that mobile app development was like booming, and it was like, even though it was like Objective-C, low level fun programming, really, I still had to do my manual memory management back then. And then just got to the point that I was like, okay, either I accept that I won't be able to work with this technology, or I have to change my direction and just change my employer, really. So I was working at my first first employer for 9 years. So it was a big step for me. In hindsight, I wish I did it earlier. But I switched to another consulting company, and based on my interviewing with them, they basically said, so you want to do mobile iOS development? Well, based on the interviews, it seems to be something you can do. So we're going to put you on a project at a large retail bank in the Netherlands. And it's just your probation time. If you make it, you'll make it. You have a contract. If you don't make it, hey, it's not our loss. At least you tried, right? So they put me on it's like first day they put me on a contract at a client, supervised by a senior colleague of the same company. And it was like, okay, after 2 weeks, he basically gave me like the green light. Okay, this is fine. Let this kid just do whatever he wants, and he won't make a mess of things. Of course, I already had like close to a decade of professional software development experience in corporate and enterprise environments. So that's like the hardest part of software development in these large companies. It's more like the politics and all the communication you need to do around the actual code writing that you do. So I had that down, and then just coding like mobile code was just like a detail in everything, but that worked out fine. At the same time, I also got involved with the Dutch meetup community for iOS developers and Mac developers, CocoaHeadsNL. And we started doing meetups, and the person who did that before me, he basically got like he got an itch, and he needed to move back to the United States because he was from the East Coast originally, and he moved back to New York, and he basically said, "Hey, I've got this whole meetup thing going. I don't have time anymore from the other side of the Atlantic Ocean, so here's everything. Enjoy it. Good luck with it." That's like now almost 10 years ago. And in the meantime, like a half year in, I got some other people involved, and sponsored by my then employer, we were able to incorporate the CocoaHeadsNL meetup community into a non-profit in the Netherlands. So it's a registered non-profit. So it's a legal entity, which makes it a whole lot easier to just get financial backing from companies, because the issue you run into if you do that on your own is that companies, they're really afraid, okay, but if we give you money, tax services, they will see that as some sort of taxable income, and it's like going to get complicated. It's going to cost a lot. But if you have a separate legal entity, they'll go, yeah, sure, take our money. It's like, we want exposure. What can you do for us? It's like a sponsorship that's very clean and easy for them. So that basically made this whole meetup community take off, and allowed me to like really network with fellow iOS developers. So yeah, been doing that for a decade now as well. 4.5 years into 4.5 years after switching from my first employer to my second employer, I again made a move because I just wanted to work at a smaller company. So I started working at a really small agency for like 9 months. Didn't work out for me. And then I switched to a startup in Amsterdam that was based on fashion retail support. So you can imagine that if you own a clothing store or a chain of clothing stores, you need to do your inventory purchasing a couple times a year. So like 2 to 6 times a year. And that's a lot of paperwork. And the product of this startup was basically to put all that paperwork into an iPad product, so that while these people were doing their purchases at these fashion retail centers, they could have like a running tally of what they actually plan to purchase or what expenses they made. So basically typical things, accounting that a computer can really easily do, but if you do it on paper, it's going to get messy quickly. And the whole gimmick of this company was to incorporate the client-side experience on an iPad, which had to be visual, because fashion people, they're like really visually oriented. They need to see what colors of collection they're purchasing. But then on the back office, they wanted to incorporate with these fashion brands, so that they could really load their inventory with images and everything into the back end of this product, so that not only can you touch and see and feel the clothes, but once you select them, you also have them on your iPad with a picture, with all the details attached to it as well, so that you had like an integrated experience, and you just, when you're back home, making your choice of what you actually want to purchase, because we're talking about hundreds of thousands of euros or dollars each time they have to like do this inventory refresh. And that was like really, mind-blowing really, because with a team of 4, we were working on a microservice-based backend on Amazon cloud services, with microservices based on, I believe it was Django and REST-based. So we made like 20 to 30 smaller services, and just got exposure again to like backend work, which I did a lot in my first 9 years of my career. Switched to front end, and then basically the combination of really doing full stack work happened back then, and that was a lot of fun. Gained a lot of exposure and experience there, and then life happens. You gain and you have the luck of finding a life partner. Kids become involved, and things get a little bit more complicated to just focus on where you work all the time, because it's getting married is that just takes a bunch of time, and it's a lot of fun. But getting kids really changes your perspective. And when that happened, my wife and I had a long conversation. Okay, how are we going to do this? What's our style of parenting going to be? And we came to the conclusion that, okay, I want to work closer to home in some capacity. And so I moved my job from this startup company to a Dutch insurance company. So that's enterprise again. And I worked for like a few years in an insurance company working on their mobile products, fortunately. And that's where I really made this growth from being a very senior developer to more of a lead developer. Because by that time I was close to like 20 years into software development. And there I really had to make the transition of, okay, being focused on code all the time. And now it's not only me coding, but it's also a team of 9 people that is around me that is coding as well. And basically I'm supposed to be sort of like their coach, their guiding light, the decision maker when it's needed, the person who they look to if things get hard, just the stable factor really for everybody. And that was kind of a hard journey for me because if you're just used to writing code all the time and all of a sudden you're like responsible for the output of other people, and it's not that you're like their manager, but you have a big influence on how they perform and also what standards you expect a whole team to live by as a software development group. I really had to learn that. And at some point, I just started making notes about things I learned. And that got to be so basically like expansive that it was like, okay, maybe I can do something with this. And I always had like this idea, maybe I want to like someday write a small book. And that's basically when I started writing my book, Being a Lead Software Developer, which is basically a sort of like condensed and redacted version of my notes on my own journey into being a lead software developer. So I really used to grab back to it. So I look back and said, okay, what are some good things to do, like on specific events? And I really wrote in that style. If I came up with something, I'm missing something here, added it to this book. And then at some point I started editing it and gave it some structure, because it's really structured into 3 parts, but that's just like a copywriting process that you get involved with. And what's really fun there is that I started writing this book basically because I got a bit bored by being at home all the time, because that was like when this book was written was like I think it was like in the middle of this whole pandemic thing that happened, and it sort of was like a escape valve to just do something useful and not just be like consuming content all the time while you were at home, because I was making sure that I got my exercise, but there was not a lot happening in our lives back then. You were just basically at home doing your life's things like work, make sure that the kids get something that resembles an education, work some more, and then basically in the evenings there's not much you can do, because usually you would go out, meet friends, get your mother-in-law over to just watch the kids and go out with your wife. The things were like happening in that way. So you have to let it out in some way, and that was basically also a little bit of my way to cope with things. In the meantime, I moved away from this insurance company and I got started at Stream, which is that chat product that you mentioned at the start of the recording. And they basically, I interviewed with them on my initiative, and they basically had 2 positions open. One was like a lead architect, SDK type thing, so really strictly technical role. And they had a developer relations position open. And I talked to a recruitment person who was like employed by this company and working for this company, so not something that you hire off the market. And she at some point said, yeah, but you should really try and interview for this DevRel thing as well, because what I didn't mention yet is that, and I'm doing that this year as well, I like organizing events like meetups, but I also organized 4 developer conferences by now, small conferences, but this year we're doing the 5th version and we're trying to grow it from 120 attendees to 200 attendees in Amsterdam. So if you're an iOS app developer or have an interest in that, check us out. I'm hoping Len will put a link in the show notes. But based on what I did, so meetups, doing things online, having a podcast, because I started that during Corona pandemic as well. She basically told me, yeah, you should interview for this role as a developer relations engineer or person as well within our company. And then at the end, basically gave me 2 offers, and I just got to choose my poison, really. Do I go left? Do I go right? And I took on the developer relations role, and it's been a lot of fun doing that for like close to 2 years now. November will be 2 years, so we're just getting there. So that's like in a nutshell a bit of a recap of my professional history. I think we're like 10 minutes in already. So anything I need to clarify, Len?
Yeah, no, not to clarify, but there's you just thank you very much for that great story, and you've just given us a lot to talk about. For anyone listening who missed it, as I mentioned, you host a podcast and you know how to talk for 20 minutes at a time. So that's Dan tell a coherent and sort of successive story just off the cuff, which is just fantastic. And I usually say this to guests off camera, but like when someone starts an interview that way, I'm always like, I know this is going to be fun, because they have a lot to say and they can sort of spontaneously structure it. It's just fantastic when that happens. One thread I wanted to pull on there was you mentioned how when you were sort of first learning to program, like with the first computer that your dad brought into the house and stuff. Did you say that he was getting programs over the radio?
Yeah, that was like a thing back in the day. You might remember that you had it on Commodore as well, because usually from my age, I'm like 43. People, they get their first exposure with either a ZX Spectrum or a Commodore 64, and if you're a little bit later, it's like one of these IBM clone type things. So it's a 86 or what? Don't even know the numbers anymore. I know 286, but there was one thing before that as well, or 2 actually. And if you're like familiar with the IBM style of PC, you probably know these big old floppy disks, the 5.25 inch. But before that, you had like tape decks, and you could record what was on those tapes from broadcast radio as well. And it was like, if you have this old school modem sounds, it's basically what to then just broadcast over the airwaves. And it's like a whole bunch of gibberish if you listen to it, but if you record it and if you load it in the correct style of computer, so they had like a section that was like Sinclair based, and there was like a section that was like Commodore based. And then you could just load one of these programs on a desk on a tape, and this tape you could then put in your tape deck of your computer and then load up a program, because that's like you had like these backup tapes. That's something a lot of people are familiar with, and that's like magnetic based. But then it's like ones and zeros on it. But with these broadcast tapes that you could then record and then play back, that was like analog. So it was the sound that was then interpreted to be a binary thing again. So it was like this beeping and booping and scrambled noises that you would hear if you would play it back on a real radio, and people would quickly yell at you to turn it off because you're going to break the radio or something. But it's like a whole bunch of noise that you can just record and play back in your computer, and your computer can actually understand that.
That's fascinating. As soon as you said, it's a tape, so you can record it on the radio. I'm like, of course, but I'd never heard that before. And it never occurred to me. And it's interesting actually that this podcast, just because so many of the guests are programmers, and it's become a bit of a kind of time capsule of the times when those people sort of got to know how to program, as you just mentioned. Depending on your kind of 5-year generation, your experience can be very different. And yeah, that's just really fascinating. And of course, such a contrast to nowadays, where kind of like you got kind of endless resources. The idea of someone like, oh, how am I going to get a program? Well, I might have to type it out from a magazine, or I can record it on the radio.
Yeah, it was pick your poison. Either like wake up in the middle of the night and record something, or have one of these magazines and type for 2 hours and hope you don't make any typos, because then you're like searching without end to find your typo and then hope it runs. And of course, when your mom got in, you need to eat and you need to turn off the computer, and it was like, no, please don't, because you could not save any of these things with ease. You didn't have floppy disk yet. Of course, you had tape decks, but if you wanted to store something on one of these tapes, you were still busy for like 10 or 15 minutes to get it on the tape, and then you still had to hope that it was correctly on the tape, because it wasn't that stable, or it broke a lot of times, in the sense that if you tried to load it back, it was just not working. So
Another thing you mentioned there that was a very interesting part of your story was, and this is interesting to me just again by coincidence because of something I was talking about with someone recently, but when you do a sort of like a 4-year degree,
mhm.
it's more common than I think even we think ourselves for like procedural matters to come up. And
Yeah,
so one of the values of like when you know someone's gone through that is that actually they've probably like it's not just the subject that they studied that degree reflects. It's that like overcoming kind of institutional challenges. And
yeah,
so you said in your final year, you and a bunch of students had to kind of take the initiative to get together to kind of propose to the institution itself how to complete
yeah,
your degree.
yeah. It's very funny because what we started as a program was called Information Science for Mechanical Engineering. So it was like approaching mechanical engineering from the computer science direction. So we had a lot of technical subjects that were like more or less related to engineering school, and not so much to the math side of the school, because historically computer science was always in the maths department, and we were like really bridging that gap. So the typical example of that is a program logic control. That's like the box that is on a conveyor belt that controls the whole process in a factory, and those things need to be programmed. And what was funny with this program is they started it with that idea in mind, but then the students, they really started dwindling quickly, because we started with like 30 people on the entire program, and by the end of the second year we were left with 6 students. So I think they saw this decline in the headcount on the program while it was happening, and they were basically hoping that the final 6 would also not last. But we were lasting, and we were like, yeah, but we're like invested into this thing for 2 years now, so we're gonna damn well finish it as well. Excuse my language. So we got really upset about this, and fortunately we had one of the students who had like a dad with some legal background, so he had his he had his staff look into this. Okay, what are the rights that these boys have? And one girl actually. And we were really like, okay, so this is what we can do, so let's just try. And the end result was actually very, very interesting, because it was not a regular program compared to what you would typically see on a school or a university, but it was very beneficial, because it's basically the 6 of us with this teacher. We really had to come up with, okay, how can we like create a program for ourselves that is like meaningful, has structure, that has enough weight, so that at the end of the 4 years that the school can actually say, okay, with a straight face, these people, they've earned their diplomas. And we had a lot of fun doing that. And what you also mentioned, if you look at kindergarten, for instance, you have kids they come in, and they're in their behavior, they're like sort of unstructured. They don't know what group activity is. They don't know how to sit in a circle and really do the things, the behaviors and the procedures that a group needs to do in a classroom to be able to be educated. So that's the whole point of kindergarten, is to gradually get these kids ready to sit in elementary school and really be in a class setting and be able to absorb knowledge and to start reading, to start writing, because that's where it starts. And what you mentioned in university and in those kinds of programs, what you learn is like, okay, how do you work together on a more or less open-ended projects? Because in secondary school, the projects that you do are quite often very goal-oriented. You need to achieve this, and you need to take these steps. But in university type education, it's like, okay, these are the parameters. This is your budget. Usually the budget is allocated in time that you have available. Go do it and make the best out of it, and make your own choices, and especially argue why you made certain choices and why those choices, given the circumstances, were the best choices, because that's what you need to do in work life as well. Because I don't know how your work life is, but to me it feels like a constant discussion, sometimes an argument, to together come up with a way how you can best spend your budget, your time, and what is the best next thing to work on as a group of people. And everybody has their own part in that. And I think that's an important skill that they try and teach in these educational programs, I think, in the end.
Yeah, no, I think that's a really great description of a distinction that I like to make between sort of education and training. We all do training, we all do education, but one of the differences is that that sort of the reason there's this sort of like implicit kind of hierarchy difference between them is that the education thing has this component of being independent and taking the initiative and having being like learning how to face any challenge that comes your way, rather than learning a specific set of skills. And like I said, we all do training, but the education thing is like that's when sort of something pushes you off course, and you have to figure out a new way to get back, and then that figuring out new ways to get back on course is where the sort of extra sort of part of it comes from. And that's just a great sort of descriptive example. Like, there you are, you're like maybe 20 years old, and you've got to come up, you and your friends have to come up with and draw on the resources like a friend's dad or something like that. You have to, to sort of like come up with your own course. And that's just a really great example of that kind of challenge, like that can come up, that people, I think, again, we sort of like even discount in our own past. Once we've done it enough times, what a kind of accomplishment that is, and the value of stubbornness probably as well. And so, so you've given us this great description of your career and sort of the different things you did. So just going on to talk about your book and sort of to meld the two, there was a point where you'd had a lot of experience, but then at one point you were kind of probably tapped on the shoulder or something like that and said, "We need you to be a lead developer now."
Yeah, that was actually very funny why I was selected for that, because they basically they basically ranked all the iOS developers in the department or on the project. That's not a project; it's a product, and they basically ranked them based on their salary. And it was like, you're at the top of the list, Jeroen. So you're going to be the lead developer now. It's like, excuse me, what am I supposed to do now? And it's like, you're the lead developer, so go lead. Okay. And I was like, I was thrown in at the deep end back then because, yes, I was already doing software development for 2 decades already. Oh, wow. And I've seen a lot of things, but I always was the person who was like really deep into very specific technical things. So at some point, I was really well versed in anything SQL related. You could just throw me a 5-page SQL statement and I could make heads and tails out of it. And also like threading and memory issues and debugging those and all those things. So I was really good at like the deep technical stuff. And I think I was a prime case of potentially being somebody who would suffer of the, I think it's called the Peter principle. So that you get like promoted all the time until you're like at a level that you're like, not capable anymore to do the work at that level. And I really noticed with this lead development, I almost passed that ceiling, I think, for myself. So I really, that really scared the pants out of me. I should use the correct pronunciation for that one. And I really, if something scares me, there's 2 ways I deal with that. And the first thing is just act if it's not there. Just nope, it's not happening. It's not here. It's not there. I just do my normal thing and I'm fine. And the other thing is that I have this tendency to, otherwise is I'll go overanalyze things. So it basically freezes me in place and I just start reading about things, looking into things and all those types of activities. But fortunately, in this case, I had one close friend of mine who noticed that this was happening in my work life. And she basically, at some point, she just got me up, dragged me into a bar and set me on a bar stool, handed me a beer and said, okay, now you're going to tell me what's happening on your work, because the way you're talking and behaving about your work, it's different and something is not sitting well with me. So start talking. And she just happened to be somebody who worked in the Dutch military. So she was very well versed in hierarchy, and she also had like an executive level of a rank within the military there. And basically, she started schooling me on, okay, so you have, even if it's a company, there's structure, there's hierarchy. They basically put you out of the group and they put you above the structure in some way, not on like managing them, but on knowledge and experience, and that you're like the CEO of this group, And if something is amiss with the entire group, it's your problem because you just let it slack. It's really the typical, if you see these movies, it's like if you have like these barracks with these beds made, and if one of the people doesn't have the bed made up right, it's not only that individual's person's problem. He won't get chewed by that alone, but also the CEO of the group who then didn't basically train this person up correctly to be able to do this correctly. So and she really talked to me and made sure that I got some tools to really get myself started. And that's also where my note-taking started, because she basically told me, what I do is I just take a whole bunch of notes, and you should do that as well. And so, okay. She tells me to do that, okay, then I'll just do that. And it worked out all right, I think. We achieved a lot within this group in like 2 years. And based on these notes, there was so much in there, but it was so unstructured that it was at some point becoming like a nuisance to me, because if I wanted to find something in my notes, I couldn't find it because it was just too much. So I started basically editing my own notes, copy editing even. And then at some point I was like, I can maybe write a book about this or something. And that's when the idea started. Okay, now I'm gonna come up with an outline, make sure that this outline is in some way sensible. So have a second pair of eyes, look at it and see if it's a structure that is in some way at least halfway decent. And then started filling in the blanks really to come up with a way that it was something somewhat meaningful, at least to me. And then at some point you have to like show it to somebody else, which is very scary. And then you get like feedback, and it's like it's not like a huge hit or anything, but just I've sold it like over 200 times, I think, now on Leanpub, and I'm also selling it to Gumroad, also like a few hundred. So all in all, it's like it paid for the time that I actually invested in converting my notes into a book, really. So, and that's about it, really.
I want to thank you as being a very good podcast guest for taking part of that sort of entire sort of segment on your own, for where I asked how did the actual practical writing of the book happen. Yeah. And that's actually a really, sort of just setting aside how great that story is, and sort of I love that personal kind of part of it where someone took you aside and like sort of had something very direct to say to you, but then gave you an opportunity to sort of like let out what she obviously saw was already there. You just needed to articulate it and have someone to give you some space to do that. But the idea of a lot of books some books have their grounding in this sort of top down, but in a lot of them it's bottom up. It's like I was thrown into this situation. I didn't know how to deal with it. So I read a lot. You did what a lot of people do, and they should do with your book, which is read books. But also take your own notes. Think of your own path through this and sort of chart it. And think about what you can do with that information when it's done. And so for anyone listening with this, it's so interesting to me, this sort of way books can come out of these very direct personal experiences that people have. And so the advice in them is often hard won. And so there's lots of advice in this book. One of the things you talk about is one of the first things that I think typically programmers, the first thing they sort of face when they're given a lead developer role, which, as you point out, isn't like, it's not like quite like being a formal manager where you're not programming anymore. You're still probably programming and stuff like that. But it's interruptions. And this is something that all of a sudden it's like, you sort of build a stack in your head and you're sort of like down a path, and then boom, Slack message or someone literally tapping you on the shoulder if you're working in an office, or a call or what have you. And then you're kind of like, you want to help them every time. But then if you sort of only allow yourself to be pulled around by other people, you're kind of not leading anymore either, even though you're giving advice all the time. And so I was wondering if you could maybe think back of what that experience was like for you, and how you eventually sort of, what advice would you give to someone if it's like their day one of lead managing, and they're like, being drawn in all these different directions?
It's you want to structure your own week, your own work, your own week, really. But you don't have to put this structure on your environment immediately. So what I would like do initially is that make sure that you, the people that you need to speak to on a regular basis, that you either book appointments with them. It sounds stupid, but or make it a point to talk to them in like an informal setting at a coffee machine. It really depends. If you work remote, of course, you have to schedule time. If you work in an office environment, it's a lot easier to have these casual conversations of like 10 minutes with everybody that you need to touch base with. That's like management speak for like just talk to somebody. And with structuring your own work, because what you mentioned is indeed one of the bigger challenges, is like, okay, how do you get like time that actually allows you to do some focused work? And it's really something that I got from Cal Newman's Deep Work book, I think it was from, is to just put a scheduled appointment in your calendar, like 2 hours, 3 hours, however much time that you need, and make sure that it's on the same day, the same part of the day. There's always like gaps in like an office environment or in a remote working environment. You know, these hours are hardly ever taken up by anything except if there's like an emergency. So just block that time in your schedule, because then you also prevent an occasional appointment to just pop in that block of time, because people see like a wide open space in your schedule, and I don't know why, but you always plan it like smack bang in the middle. So you have like time available from 9 till 12, and people think, yeah, I'm not going to put it at 9 because they're probably just still coming in, drinking their coffee. Not going to put it at 11 because then this person is already thinking too much about their lunch break or something. So I'm just going to put it at like 10 or like 10:30. And it's like your entire morning is gone because you have to prepare this meeting, and even though that you're doing other work, I don't know about you, but I'm already thinking about the next event on my schedule, even though I know I'm just going to spend like 5 or 10 minutes like right before it to just prepare myself, and like 5 or 10 minutes after it to wrap things up. But just block that time in your schedule. That's the biggest trick that people actually have learned after I told them. It's like this. It's like so stupid. You just block something. You just make an appointment with yourself. You almost feel like a muppet doing it, but it really works, because for some reason, if there's like a blocked section of time in your schedule, people they honor that. At least that's the tendency. And they stay clear of it. And so with that, you can actually steer that you have like a focus block of time in the morning on your Monday, maybe again on the Wednesday afternoon, and maybe some shorter block later in the week. And that's one of the bigger tricks that's easily implementable by anyone, really. And the other one, I think, is being a lead developer is not about telling people what to do, but you do need to lay down some ground rules. And this is one that's from the Pragmatic Programmer. It's like, don't go talking to somebody the minute you run into something. At least give it like 10 or 15 minutes to like let it percolate, try to solve it yourself. But also with Slack messages, make it a point, if somebody sends you a Slack message, if it's not the right time for you to respond to that, just don't respond to it. It takes like discipline, but Slack is asynchronous by nature, so treat it like that, and just turn the entirety of Slack, turn the program off, or just turn notifications off when you're doing some focus work, because those messages will be there like once you get out of your zone and have some time to actually deal with these things. And the same for email. What I tend to do is I open up my email in the morning, go through it, pick out the ones that I need to work on like in the next couple hours. So I schedule my morning. And then once I've did that, I just close off my email, and maybe I check it during lunch time or like right before. And at the end of the day, I open it up again, unless there's a reason that I need to open it up in between. So just like cut off those channels if you don't want to be bothered with them. Because if the building is on fire, they will come to your desk. If the server park is like burning down, they will actually call you if it's needed. And so just trust that people will find you when it is really important. And yes, people have this tendency to think that whatever they're working on is the most important thing in the world. Probably to them it is, so respect that. So don't tell them they're like stupid or anything, but just like let it sit for a while, because quite often you will just see that a message comes in, I need help with something, and just them typing it to you and then thinking about it a little bit half an hour later you get them, yeah, I got it solved already, or they went to somebody else, or for some reason it's not a problem anymore. So you get the follow-up message that is like, okay, can check it off without doing anything. So that's good. And then later touch base with this person again. Hey, I noticed you sent this message. So then you do indicate the value in them thinking about things and communicating things, but then sort of like, yeah, but I noticed that you were able to fix things yourself as well, and it was really nice. But hey, next time, just try and like see if you can like do it without the message, because I do want to know when you succeed in something. Let me know. But yeah, just the gap in between. It's like a bad television program. It's like I want to know how it ends, but I want to stay focused as well. So I rather have the entire story in one message than like two messages that is like half an hour apart.
Yeah, no, that's a really great way of thinking about it. Then, especially the idea of if you're confronting an issue before firing off a message to someone else. Imagine you got that message yourself. What would you?
Oh yeah.
What would you do next? Sort of like almost like type a note to self instead of a note to someone else. It's like, then the next thing I would do is if I were them and I got this message, the next thing I would do is ask me, have you tried this or have you tried that?
Yeah, you know, it is sometimes you feel rude when you don't respond to a message, because people, they send it to you because of course they respect your opinion, they want your input. So it's only natural that you want to provide that like as soon as possible. But the cost of like responding and taking yourself out of this thing you're working on then and there is much greater to the whole environment and just not helping this one individual immediately. So it's like it's sort of like a sort of bookkeeping that you have to do in your own mind. Okay, this costs me more if I help them right now, then instead of like, okay, let it sit for a while, and if they still have an issue with it like an hour later, then I can help them, because then it's more opportune for me to actually respond to them. But it can feel really rude doing that. That's true.
No, I know exactly what you mean. But that's one of those things that when the responsibility's sort of on your head now, you sort of have to start dealing with. Which you do again. You talk about a lot of these things very well in your book. The last question I have before we end the interview, when the guest is a Leanpub author, is it's sort of two questions at once. But if there was one thing that had you shaking your fist and going, "Damn you, Leanpub," when you were working on your book, or hitting the publish button or finding pricing or something like that, or if there was so if there was one thing we could fix for you or one magical feature we could build for you, is there anything you can think of that you would ask us to do?
That's a good one. In essence, the product as is, I really like, because I didn't have to think about typesetting my book and making sure that it looked great. But what I missed initially, and it is in the doc somewhere, is that you can actually section up your book quite easily. So you have like this file that you say, okay, these markdown files are or Markua files are my book's content, and this is the order they need to be like picked up and then rendered. But that's a possibility, that you can actually structure and section off parts of your work by just splitting the files up and having like smaller files to work with. Because I find it like with markdown files, the smaller they are, the more focused and easier it is for me to write paragraphs on that and make sure that it's actually meaningful. And but that's like more like in nitpicky and like, hey, that could be maybe documented better. But on the other side, I really enjoyed Leanpub in the sense that it just took away a lot of the hassle and responsibility of making sure that it looked like a book once it was rendered. And that was part of the reason why I actually picked Leanpub as my authoring platform, and to just like go full in with it and just write in something that I'm familiar with as a software developer. And that's it really.
Yeah, thanks very much for sharing that. That's I think the first time we've had that feedback, and that's really important, because of course, when one person says it, when you hear it from one person, like at least 100 people have had the same experience. And just to very briefly talk about that, one of the curious things is, because of basically the legacy of word processing programs, a lot of people are accustomed to doing things like writing something in one file. So I've got one Word doc file for my whole book, unless it gets more than, I don't, it's been a while since I've used Word, but it used to be that like 100 pages, you sort of started running into problems, which is kind of funny. And the way a Leanpub book works is you can actually kind of build your book from multiple files. You could have a different text file for every paragraph if you wanted, and you have a file called book.txt where you just list all your book files, and you're like, this is chapter 1, chapter 2, chapter 3, whatever. You can even put even have like content in there, like a table that's got its own file, or a code sample that's got its own file that is then next in the list, in a sense. So then I'm just bringing this up to say one of the hard things for us is like communicating to people about this, because some people really like when you start saying, oh, you can have multiple files, they're already like, what are you talking about? That's too much load. I just want to do it in one file like I've always done it. And other people are like, oh my God, I've always had to do it in one file. Can't I please just split it up? And so it's sort of like how we sort of explain things to people when we're starting out can be very delicate process. And I'll definitely keep in mind your feedback there, because that's really important for us to hear. Well, with that said, we're approaching the sort of hour mark. So thank you very much for this call. And thank you very much for explaining everything about your career so well, and like how the book came out of the very direct experiences you had was just so great to hear. And thank you very much for being a guest on the podcast today, and for being a Leanpub author.
Oh, thanks for having me, Len. It was very enjoyable, and it's always nice to be a part of something that you actually listen to yourself.
Yeah. Oh, and before we go, you did mention that you're organizing this iOS conference. The website for it for everyone listening is do-ios.com. So do iOS. Go there, check it out. We'll definitely put it in the show description. And I encourage everyone to take a look.
Okay, thank you very much. It's going to be in November in Amsterdam in the Netherlands. So have a look. There's still plenty of time to see if people can come.
Awesome. Thanks.